Hey guys, Will from Boosted Autos here. Today we're going to be fixing this coolant leak in the MX5. I'll jump in and show you quickly. I've already removed the heat shield from the exhaust manifold here, and you can see this pipe just here, which runs into the back of the water pump, which is on the front of the engine there. Now the coolant is leaking from an O-ring on the back of that pipe, and that is a replacement O-ring that I've purchased just there. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be dropping the coolant out of the engine. I'm told that you lose a lot of coolant if you try to do it without removing the coolant first. So we'll drain the coolant, we'll do it properly, and then we're going to undo this bolt here on the exhaust manifold, which is a mounting point for this pipe. The pipe should then hopefully pull out of the back of the water pump. We'll be able to replace the O-ring. Now, one thing we do need to be really careful of is that we don't damage the heater core mounting point here. The end of that is made of a really thin copper apparently, and if you move and contort this pipe around too much, you can damage that, and then you've got to replace your whole heater core. So we're going to try and do it sort of in place down here. May end up having to remove this hose as well to get to it, but I've never really done much like this before, so it's going to be a learning experience for me, so let's get into it. Right, so to remove the heat shield, there's 8 bolts, 2 at the top, 1 kind of on the side here, 2 down the bottom here, 1 there, 1 here, and 1 here. So it's quite a job to get to those bottom ones. I did it from the top. You probably could get in from the bottom if you jack the car up, but I'm trying to avoid jacking the car up for the sake of this video. So once you've done that, you kind of got to contort it out. I'll show you in the video I recorded yesterday where I removed it, how that kind of works. But I also ended up undoing the bolts 1, 2, and 3 for the airbox as well, and just kind of lifting that up and out of the way. Alright, 1 removed heat shield. That was a lot harder than I thought it would be. So there's a little drain plug on the bottom of the radiator which you can undo with a wrench like that. Now I've bought this capture tank here. So what happens is you put this underneath the radiator, you undo this little lid here. The coolant will drip into the tray and get captured in here. Now because the coolant that I've got in this car is relatively new, it's only a couple months old, I'm going to check and have a look and see if there's much sediment in the bottom of this once we're done. We screw the cap back in once we've dropped all the coolant, screw the bottom plug back in, and then what we can do is we can actually reuse that same coolant, just tip it in to a nice big funnel again. So hopefully it works. Get this drip tray underneath. Try and get it aligned. Now I'm going to put on some safety goggles as well, just because I'm paranoid about splashing myself in the face here. So we'll undo this plug. And it should flow really slowly initially, and then once we undo the radiator cap it'll start coming out much faster. So, bit there. Try and center it over the hole as much as possible. Alright, now we undo the radiator cap and it should start flowing. There we go. So now we just wait. There should be about 5 litres there, but I'm not sure because this is a larger capacity aftermarket radiator that I'm running on this car. There may be a little bit more. So what I've done is I've bought 4 litres of additional coolant, which I can add on top of this coolant if I need to, just in case I lose any when I'm removing that other pipe. But we'll wait a couple of minutes now for that coolant to all drain and see how much we end up with. Alright, so that looks like it's all the coolant out, so we will replace that drain plug. I might just bounce the car a couple of times just to see if I can get a bit more. Yeah, that's about it. Alright, so I'm just going to put that drain plug back in and finger tighten it now. Obviously make sure your threads are really clean before you do this, because you don't want to be damaging the plug at all. Alright, so that's back in. We'll move our coolant drip tray out of the way. Alright, and I'm just going to tighten up that bolt a little bit more than it was previously, because I don't want that to work its way loose when I'm driving. That should do. So only a little bit of tension on it, but just a little bit more than finger tight. Alright, so now we need to remove this heater coil return pipe. Alright, so it's a 14mm bolt, but you can't really get to it from that side, so I'm going to try and get to it from here. There we go, cracked it. So there was quite a bit of torque on that. So now, the moment of truth, we'll see how much coolant we lose and if we can easily pull this pipe out. So the little tab that holds it in place is there. So we just need to kind of work it off the stud. I might need to get in from the other side, I think. So we didn't actually lose any coolant when we pulled that out, but the interesting thing is that the O-ring that's on that is completely flat. Now I don't know whether that's an aftermarket O-ring or what, but the O-ring that you saw earlier in the video that was the replacement is completely round, so it's like a beveled round edge. So either that's an aftermarket O-ring or it's just been completely squished flat over time. But either way, we'll chuck the new one on, we'll give the pipe a bit of a clean up, and hopefully it all works. Hopefully they've sent me the right replacement O-ring. I'm a little bit concerned about that because that looks so much different from what I've got. But anyway, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. All right, so I'm gonna see if I can just pick this O-ring off with my hands. Obviously I don't want to risk damaging it with a screwdriver if I can help it, but I might actually just cut it off with a Stanley knife, I think. Obviously we want to be really careful not to damage the metal around the seals, so I'm just going to very gently just kind of slice it. I might go the other way actually. Okay, so what we're doing there is being very careful not to damage the metal. Anyway, hopefully the replacement fits, but what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna clean up that pipe. So got my trusty microfiber towel, which I seem to use in every video, and I'm just gonna clean the front of this pipe. Now I don't want to use a wire brush or anything like that because it's not too dirty, and the last thing I want to do is kind of score up the metal pipe and create another leak. So the pipe is quite corroded around the edges, but the area for the mounting surface for the O-ring is not too bad, so I'm just going to give it a general clean. I'm going to do the same thing in the back of the water pump as well. You're not going to be able to see this, but I'm just going to shove my rag in there, just kind of spin it around, make sure that surface is really nice and clean. It's actually not too bad working in here. Doesn't look like I'll need to remove any other parts, which is nice. So what I'm going to do now is put the new O-ring on. You can see here what I was talking about. That's the old one and that's the new one. So the diameter is the same, so it looks like it should work. It looks like it is definitely the right part. It's just that one's either been squished completely flat over time, or it's an aftermarket different one. But anyway, we'll chuck the new one on and we'll see what happens. Squished on there relatively easily. Now what we want to do is we just want to lubricate the thing a little bit with some coolant as well. It's tricky to get the, you've got to try and push it in far enough that it seals up on here. I'm going to lubricate it a little bit better and come back. Alright, so I've got a little bit of water-based lubricant on my fingers here. Don't ask me where I got it. Alright, hopefully that does the trick. There we go, got it. Alright, it's in. That was a lot more difficult than I thought it would be actually. But hopefully we haven't torn the grommet. I don't see anything poking out the back, which is a good sign. I'll have a good look at it with a torch before we fill back up with coolant. But the next step is obviously to put that bolt back on the stud. Screw it on as far as you can by hand because you don't have a whole lot of movement with the spanner. So that's on. Alright, now I do want to put a fair bit of torque on it because it had a fair bit of torque on it originally, so yeah, that should do it. There we are. Alright, so all we need to do now is fill back up with coolant and see if we have any leaks. So when you're refilling the cooling system, it's very, very, very important to do what's called bleeding or burping the system. So what that means is you fill it up with coolant right to the very top, you let it sit running for about 20 minutes or so with the heater core open, so with the air conditioner set to on with the heater. And what you need to do is you need to put the funnel in there, fill the water up a little bit past the top, so sort of have it sitting maybe 10 centimeters up, because what will happen is the engine will consume some water as it pulls through the system. So what we want to do is we want to maintain that level in the funnel as the coolant draws through, and then when we stop seeing bubbles after about 20 minutes or so, we know that it's completely bled. So what I've done is I've gone the cheap way and just bought myself a $7 24 centimeter funnel, and I've wrapped some electrical tape around the bottom here so I've got a nice clean seal on my radiator. What you can do is you can buy spill-free funnels which have an actual radiator cap fitting on the bottom here, and they're really good because also they give you a lid which you can put on so that when you take the funnel out at the end of the job you don't spill the coolant that's in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap a screwdriver in a bit of towel and shove it down there and then lift it out when I'm done. So that's the way I'm going to do it, and I'll show you how I do that as I do it. But the first thing we need to do is just put our funnel in there. Obviously make sure that your drain plug is back in first, otherwise the coolant's just going to go straight back out to the ground. Now because we didn't lose any coolant when we took that pipe off, I'm hoping that we won't need to add much additional coolant. But anyway, we'll start filling it up and we'll see what happens. The coolant that came out still looks good, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to support the bottom here, make sure we haven't got any leaks. Support it here and just tip it back in. That looks nice and clean. Tip it back in. Obviously be really careful it doesn't splash you back in the face. If you're sensible you'll put on safety goggles, but I'm just keeping really clear from it. Now if you do start to see some sediment, stop straight away and use fresh coolant. But this is working quite well. Might just quickly check that I'm not spilling everywhere on the ground. No, we're good. We're getting pretty close to full now, I think. Alright, so that's everything that we captured, and you can see it is actually sitting up a little bit. What's going to happen is it's going to draw through. You can see it's already starting to go there with the engine not even on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my fresh container of coolant ready so that I can keep maintaining that level as I go. Because that's going to drop as soon as I start the engine. Add a little bit more in. So basically we want to wait until the thermostat's opened up and the water's circulating through the whole engine. And once we don't have any bubbles anymore and the engine's completely warmed up, we should be good. So the things we want to check is obviously that we're not spewing coolant out the back of the O-ring that we just replaced. we're not spilling anywhere underneath the car. We also need to keep an eye on the temperature gauge on the car as well to make sure that we're not overheating. Now the good news is that I'm not seeing a leak out of the back of that pipe. It looks like we're all good. So I'm going to let it heat up all the way. We're still consuming a bit of water, which is good, means it's working. So we're just going to maintain that, keep it topped up. So a couple of things that you just want to check inside the car as well. Obviously that your temperature gauge doesn't go mental, but also that your heater is working and you've got hot air coming out. So crank it up and just make sure that you've got nice hot air coming out of the vents, and that lets you know that the coolant's flowing through the heater core correctly. That's nice and warm. So it looks like we're all good. Alright, so we're fully warmed up now, everything's working fine, we've got no leaks. So what we're going to do is we're going to shut down the car, we're going to plug that funnel and pull it out, and then we'll do a quick clean up, seal everything up, and then we'll go for a test drive and make sure we don't have any proper leaks. Now obviously this coolant is really hot, so what I'm going to do is I'm just wrapping a rag around my wrench here like that. Just shoving it in the hole. And then we'll just pull it out. Now we are going to spill a little bit, but it shouldn't be too much. Just a little bit. Radiator cap's back on. And I'm just going to quickly rinse the area, make sure we don't have any coolant left behind. Only a little bit of water because everything's still hot and we don't want to heat it up. We don't want to cool it down too rapidly. So we're just rinsing it off very gently. And that's that. So all we need to do now is just go for a test drive and make sure everything's all good. Okay, so we've taken it for a test drive and I'm very happy to report that there is absolutely no leaking at all now coming out of that pipe. So see if I can show you quickly. Grab the torch down there and you can see on the back there, the back of the fitting with the torch, there's absolutely no coolant there now at all. So the next thing that we want to do is clean up a bit around the engine here while the heat shield is off. Now there's quite a bit of grease and leakage that's accumulated from the leaky valve cover gasket. So I'll be replacing the valve cover gasket at some point, but I just want to try and degrease in here and clean all of that up a little bit. I also want to, and I'll show you quickly, also want to clean up this heat shield as well because it's really grubby. Now I'm told that this is a zinc coated material which you're not supposed to polish, but look, to be honest with you, I don't really care because at some point I'll be putting headers on the car anyway and we'll probably be replacing this or getting rid of it altogether, and it looks pretty crappy as it is now. I mean, I don't really see how polishing it's going to make it any worse than it already is. So I'm going to give that a bit of a polish up with some metal polish, get that looking nice again. Obviously that will give us some time to let the engine cool down as well because I can't be bolting things back on there while the exhaust manifold is boiling hot because that obviously won't end well. Alright, so I think this is just about as good as I'm going to be able to get this part. Look, it's not perfect, but it looks a lot better than it did before. Might end up painting it one day or just removing it altogether, but it certainly looks a whole lot better than it did before, so let's chuck it back on the car. The first thing we need to do is loosen off this air box again so that we can get the heat shield back inside. So these two bolts are 12mm and then this one must be a 10mm or maybe even an 8mm. Yeah, okay, so that last one is a 10mm. Alright, so we don't need to remove it entirely. All we need to do is just move it up and out of the way enough that we can contort the heat shield back in. Now, I don't want to leave it too pinched here for too long because I don't want to damage that plastic. So we'll shove that heat shield back down. Now this is probably going to be quite tricky because I had a lot of trouble getting it out, which makes me think I'm going to have more trouble getting it in. So there's got to be a knack to this. actually need to be really careful not to damage the not to damage any pipes with the edge of that either. That's the part that I'm most concerned about. Alright, that's around that first bend. Be very careful. Got it! Okay, that actually wasn't quite as difficult as I thought it might be, so we'll put this back in the general area that it needs to go again, just so we're not damaging the tube here. Make sure we haven't worked anything else loose. Now the fun task of trying to get all the bolts back in. Now they're all the bolts are exactly the same as each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of put them in loosely, just finger tight to begin with. So what I'm doing is I'm putting a little bit of blue tack in the bottom of my socket and then shoving the bolt on top of that, and that allows me to sort of work it into place without fumbling around and dropping bolts, and that's working quite well, making it a lot easier than it would be otherwise, but it's still very tricky to get in there to some of those bolts. Anyway, we've got two more that we need to put in place, and then we just need to tighten everything up. So now we just reinstall the airbox and the job is done. Alright, we'll just quickly check that we haven't split or damaged any wires around this area in particular where we were working. Everything looks good. The O2 sensor wire is in its clips and it's not anywhere near the exhaust, so that's all fine. Alright, and there's no horrible heat shield vibrations, so we are all good to go. Alright, so that's how you fix the common coolant leak on the O-ring on the back of the water pump that goes into the heater core line. So hopefully you found the video interesting and useful. If you have, please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video. Next up, I think I'm probably going to be cracking apart these new headlights and starting to modify those. So if you're interested in that, make sure you stick around. Thank you very much for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye.